Imagine being invited to a wedding, but not as just any other guest. What if this invitation came from a rich man, who in an unexpected gesture decides to take a homeless woman as his date? Seems unlikely, right? However, that is exactly what happened. A man who had everything, wealth, success, status, made a decision that defied all social conventions. He chose to not only show up at his ex-girlfriend's wedding with a new date, but also with someone everyone underestimated. But what really caught our attention that night was not the luxury of the event, nor the surprise of the guests, but rather the transformation that this woman experienced and how she became the center of a story that no one could have predicted. It may sound like an impulsive or even controversial decision, but this gesture reveals something much deeper. What happens when someone society ignores is suddenly thrust into an environment of opulence and status? Is appearance enough to transform the way we are seen or treated? And most importantly, what does this change say about who we are inside? These are questions that force us to reflect on our own lives and how we judge others. Have you ever stopped to think about how an unexpected decision can turn everything upside down? Get ready, because this story will make you question everything you thought you knew about status, power, and true human connections. Don't miss the opportunity to continue following stories that inspire and transform. Subscribe to our channel now and turn on notifications to stay up to date with content that will change the way you see the world. Don't let these valuable lessons go unnoticed. Join our community and start transforming your life today. Imagine yourself in Daniel's shoes, a man surrounded by luxury, success, and seemingly everything anyone could want. However, he faces an emotional dilemma. His ex-girlfriend, Claire, is about to get married, and he doesn't want to attend alone. To avoid loneliness and perhaps demonstrate that his life has not stopped since the breakup, Daniel makes an impulsive decision. Walking through the city's busy streets, he locks eyes with Arlette, a homeless woman, and feels something he's never experienced before, a combination of compassion and a desire to make a difference. At that moment, the idea of inviting her to his ex's wedding comes up. Curious, right? Something that few would do. But Daniel saw an opportunity to change things for both of them. This unusual choice by Daniel, at first glance, may seem strange. After all, who would invite someone they barely know, especially a homeless person, to such a significant event? But if we stop to think, life is made up of impulsive moments that can transform our reality. Perhaps Daniel was seeking more than just companionship. He wanted to make an impact, not only on Arlette's life, but on his own as well. This attitude is a clear example of how, sometimes, we need to leave our comfort zone and allow ourselves to make bold gestures that defy social expectations. Many people faced with a situation like Daniel's would have ignored Arlette, passed straight by, or just thrown in a few coins. But Daniel did it differently. He invited her to an event that, possibly, many would think she shouldn't be at. This type of gesture opens the door to deep reflection. How often do we judge people based on their appearance or social status? Daniel, in a way, broke this barrier, showing that everyone deserves a chance to feel valued, regardless of the circumstances. And you, have you ever thought about how many opportunities you could be missing by following these pre-established judgments? Inviting Arlette can also be seen as an attempt at redemption for Daniel. Perhaps unconsciously, he wanted to make up for his own past failures. He could be trying to prove to himself, and maybe even declare, that he's not the selfish person he apparently always was. This type of attitude teaches us that we often look for ways to correct our mistakes through actions aimed at others. And here's a great lesson. When we help someone, we also help ourselves. Furthermore, by inviting Arlette, Daniel began to rewrite his own story. He could have simply invited a friend or an acquaintance, but he opted for a symbolic act. He chose someone who, at first glance, would have nothing to offer socially, but who, deep down, brought an inner greatness that he himself may not have known he was looking for. This moment is a powerful lesson in how the choices we make, especially the boldest ones, can transform the trajectory of our lives. This act of generosity was not just a gesture of kindness. It was also an opportunity for Daniel to rethink his priorities. Deep down, he knew something inside him needed to change, and Arlette symbolized that change. And it's curious how life sometimes puts us in situations that challenge us to act differently. Just like Daniel, we all face moments when we have to choose between the comfort of sameness and the boldness of a new journey. Now, you may be wondering, why would anyone do this? Why go out of the way and risk something so unusual? The answer lies in human nature itself. Sometimes we need a reality check, something that takes us out of our routine and makes us see the world from a new perspective. Daniel's invitation to Arlette was exactly that, a call to something greater, a change he may not have known he needed. This is the kind of attitude that can change the course of your life. Life offers us diverse opportunities for growth, but to take advantage of them, we need to be attentive and willing to act. Daniel saw something in Arlette that few people would see. He saw her beyond appearances, beyond her homelessness. This teaches us that to live fully, we must be willing to see people as they really are, not as society labels them. And as simple as this gesture may seem, it carries immense emotional and symbolic depth. When Daniel made the invitation, he didn't know what to expect. Was he being judged for his motivations? Perhaps. But in doing so, he took a step toward a new version of himself. He gave Arlette a chance, and at the same time, he gave himself a chance to experience something unexpected. This is the true power of genuine actions. They transform both those who receive them and those who carry them out. And so the invitation was made. Arlette, with a mixture of surprise and gratitude, accepted Daniel's invitation, without imagining the impact this decision would have on her life. Little did she know that that simple yes would set her on a path that would change everything. And, as often happens in our lives, a seemingly small decision can take us to unimaginable places. This is the beginning of a transformation, not just for Arlette, but for Daniel as well. Arlette's transformation began the moment Daniel took her to one of the most exclusive boutiques in the city. Imagine the scene. She, unaccustomed to luxury, stepping into that environment so different from her reality. His gaze, initially, reflected insecurity, a feeling of not belonging. However, Daniel's smile and the store employees' unexpected hospitality encouraged her to take the first step. Little by little, Arlette began to see herself through a new perspective, and this simple gesture of generosity was the kickoff to something much bigger. This transformative experience, however, was not just aesthetic. More than wearing a beautiful dress, Arlette was being introduced to a new way of perceiving herself. Clothing may seem superficial to many, but at that moment, it meant much more than expensive fabric. It was a symbol of dignity, an opportunity for Arlette to remember her own identity, something that life's circumstances had obscured. How many times in life do we forget who we are because of difficulties? Arlette then found herself surrounded by haute couture dresses, fine shoes, and shiny accessories. Each piece I tried on brought with it a new wave of confidence. The boutique team, who initially looked at her with curiosity, soon became accomplices in this metamorphosis. They realized that behind that woman in worn-out clothes, there was an undeniable strength and beauty. And just like that, as if by magic, Arlette saw herself as a new person, with an upright posture, a confident smile, and her head held high. Fashion, in this case, was more than style. It was a vehicle for inner change. When Arlette finally looked in the mirror, she couldn't believe what she saw. Her image reflected a strong, confident woman ready to face any challenge. It reminds us that sometimes all we need is a push, a reminder that we are capable of more than we realize. This boutique experience not only changed Arlette's appearance, but also the way she saw herself. What once seemed impossible was now within reach. Transformations like Arlette's are symbolic for all of us. We don't necessarily need expensive clothes or luxurious environments to experience profound change. What really matters is the willingness to see ourselves in a different way, to believe that we are worthy of new opportunities. Arlette teaches us that even when life knocks us down, there is always room for a new journey, a new beginning. It is interesting to note how Daniel, in providing this transformation for Arlette, was also undergoing a change. He saw her, for the first time, as a woman with potential and dignity, and not just as a date to the wedding. This shows us that when we offer the opportunity to change to another person, we are also transforming ourselves internally. Daniel was, in a way, paving the way for something bigger, both for himself and for Arlette. This journey of transformation at the boutique was just the beginning of something much bigger. When leaving the store, Arlette was no longer the same woman Daniel had met on the street. She carried with her a renewed confidence and the feeling that her life could, in fact, change. And this is exactly how great transformations begin. One step at a time, a small movement in the right direction that, in the end, results in a complete transformation. Have you ever gone through a transformation like this? Maybe not in a luxury boutique, but at some point when life gave you a new chance to see yourself with different eyes. It is in these opportunities that we find the strength to move forward, and like Arlette, we realize that we are capable of much more than we imagine. The transformation is not just in what we wear, but in the way we allow ourselves to see who we really are. When Arlette left the boutique, she wasn't just dressed to impress. She was ready to show the world, and herself, that her story was not defined by her past, but by the choices she would make from then on. Life offers us moments like this, when we have the chance to reinvent ourselves, to challenge the labels that have been imposed on us. And it is in this reinvention that we find the true power of transformation. And so, with her confidence renewed, Arlette followed Daniel's side, prepared for the next chapter of this journey. The wedding, which once seemed like a distant and inaccessible event, now became a new arena where she could show her true worth. Was the transformation complete? Not yet. What came next would be the true proof of everything she had learned. When Arlette arrived at the wedding, alongside Daniel, silence took over the room. All eyes turned to her, as if that woman's presence was something no one expected. The contrast between her previous appearance and the new image she displayed now was evident. Arlette, who had entered the boutique insecurely and simply dressed, now walked with elegance and confidence. She had transformed into a figure that defied all expectations, and at that moment, she was no longer the woman Daniel had met on the streets, but someone who seemed to belong in that luxurious setting. The first person to notice Arlette was, of course, Claire. The bride was busy greeting her guests when she suddenly saw Daniel walking in with Arlette by his side. Claire, who expected Daniel to arrive alone and possibly dejected by the breakup, was completely taken by surprise. His expression, which was once one of pure joy, faded for a brief moment. The visual and emotional impact Arlette made was so strong that even the other guests began whispering among themselves. Arlette's presence was not only unexpected, it was a declaration that Daniel had overcome his past. Claire's reaction exemplifies a common phenomenon. When we expect someone else to suffer in our absence, but they show us otherwise, we feel deep discomfort. Claire had broken up with Daniel because she believed he was too focused on his work and neglecting their relationship. Now, seeing him there, with Arlette at his side, shook his expectations. And it wasn't just Arlette's presence that disturbed her, but the way Daniel looked at her. There was something different about him, something that indicated he had changed. This change made him even more attractive in the eyes of Claire, who was beginning to question her own choices. The atmosphere at the wedding became tense. Although the guests maintained a formal and polite posture, it was impossible to ignore the curious glances and whispered conversations about Arlette. To many, she was an unknown. For others, an intriguing figure who arrived at the event with a striking presence. Arlette, in turn, walked alongside Daniel with impressive tranquility. If, inside, she was nervous, nothing in her posture revealed it. She had learned, in just a few hours, to carry that role with a dignity that few could imagine. This kind of social shock, like the one Arlette provoked, is something we have all experienced at some point. When someone unexpected enters the scene, breaking norms and challenging what we believe to be proper, the collective reaction is often one of surprise. But the real power is in how that person handles the situation. Arlette, with her new appearance and posture, made it clear that she was not just a guest. She was part of the transformation that Daniel was experiencing, and that, more than anything else, caught everyone's attention. Daniel, in turn, was proud to have Arlette by his side. He knew his choice was unconventional, but he didn't care what others thought. Arlette's presence, there was a way of showing himself, and Claire, that he had changed. The decision to bring Arlette into the marriage, someone who represented a new phase in his life, was a strategic move, although also impulsive, and the result was more powerful than he could have imagined. With every step they took together, he felt like he was leaving the past behind and embracing something new. The murmurs grew louder as Daniel and Arlette approached the other guests. Some smiled cordially, others discreetly applauded Daniel's boldness, but many still watched with a mixture of curiosity and judgment. Arlette, however, was undeterred. She knew this moment wasn't just about her or the impression she made. It was about how she chose to react, and by keeping her head high and her confident smile, she showed everyone that her value went far beyond the circumstances that had led her there. Arlette's stance at that event reflects an important teaching for all of us: the power of self-confidence. Regardless of how others saw her or what they thought, she chose to believe in herself and the path she was on. Many times in life we find ourselves in situations where we feel like we don't belong. In these moments, what defines us is how we choose to position ourselves. Arlette could have retreated from the judgmental gazes, but she chose to stand out with dignity. As the night progressed, Arlette and Daniel continued to be the focus of attention, but the initial discomfort began to dissipate. The trust and affection that Daniel showed for Arlette were undeniable, and this began to earn him the respect of many. Even Claire, who was visibly disconcerted at first, noticed that something had changed in Daniel, and this change made her think. Arlette's transformation wasn't just external. It reflected a new phase in Daniel's life too. Together, they represented the evolution that many seek but few find. As the night wore on, Claire couldn't take her eyes off Daniel and Arlette. Every time they laughed or looked at each other knowingly, she felt a pang of regret. No matter how much he tried to hide it, his feelings were on the surface. The wedding, which should have been the happiest day of her life, was now marked by a mix of mixed emotions. And then, no longer able to resist the growing tension, Claire decided to confront Daniel. She invited him for a private conversation, away from the curious eyes of the guests. The meeting would be a turning point, a chance for both to expose their truths. When Claire approached Daniel, her tone was initially polite, but there was clear anguish behind her words. She began by mentioning how surprised she was that he had brought Arlette, a woman who was clearly not part of their social circle. However, as the conversation progressed, the real reason for her uneasiness came to light. Claire felt jealous. She didn't expect Daniel to be able to move on, and Arlette's presence symbolized just that. It was a blow to his ego, proof that he had overcome his past in ways she hadn't anticipated. What Claire might not have expected was the calmness with which Daniel responded. Instead of justifying or apologizing, he listened to her with patience and serenity. Daniel was at peace with himself and the decisions he had made. He explained to Claire that, yes, Arlette wasn't someone in his circle, but she was exactly what he needed at that moment. This new connection had made him see things he hadn't seen before, both in himself and in the world around him. The tension between them was palpable, but Daniel, with his calm tone, managed to diffuse much of it. The conversation between Claire and Daniel is a classic example of how we often have expectations about people and get frustrated when they don't act according to what we imagine. Claire believed Daniel would be sad, perhaps even resentful of the marriage. But here he was, next to another woman, clearly happy. This teaches us that we cannot control the narrative of other people's lives. They will follow their own paths, regardless of what we think is right. And this is one of the biggest challenges in human relationships, accepting that the other can prosper, even without us. Throughout the dialogue, Claire made her regrets clear. She confessed to Daniel that, when she ended the relationship, she thought he would never be able to change. She hoped that time would show him the error of his ways. But what happened was exactly the opposite. Daniel changed, but in ways Claire couldn't predict. He found a genuine connection in Arlette, something that went beyond appearances or status, and it made Claire question her own decisions. Would she have been hasty in ending the relationship? These questions, however, no longer mattered to Daniel. Daniel, on the other hand, was finally at peace with the past. He had spent a lot of time reflecting on his relationship with Claire and what had gone wrong. Now, however, he saw everything more clearly. Arlette's presence, with her simplicity and strength, made him realize that he was searching for something different. something deeper. He didn't hold any grudges against Claire, but he also no longer had room for her in his life. And with that conviction, he gently explained that he was in a new chapter, and Claire was part of the past. Claire's reaction was one of surprise and sadness. She never imagined that Daniel could move forward like this, so firm and determined. She was used to being the center of his attention, and now, seeing him with someone else, she realized she no longer had control over him. This moment of confrontation was crucial for both, as it allowed each person to put their feelings on the table and move forward. For Claire, it was the beginning of painful acceptance. For Daniel, it was confirmation that he was on the right path. This type of emotional confrontation is something that many of us have experienced at some point in our lives. When the past knocks on the door and tries to pull us back, it takes courage to move forward. Daniel showed this courage by standing firm in his decision to follow a new path. He didn't let Claire's guilt or feelings make him doubt his choices. This is a great lesson for anyone who has ever had to deal with a broken relationship. Don't let yourself be trapped by the other person's expectations. The important thing is to follow your own path with confidence. As Claire processed Daniel's words, she realized there was nothing more to say. The reality was clear. He was happy, and that was something she couldn't change. As painful as it was, Claire had to accept that their relationship had come to an end long before that wedding. What was left for her now was to learn to deal with what she had lost and, perhaps, find her own path to happiness. And so, with a deep sigh, she thanked Daniel for his honesty and wished him the best. With that, the tense atmosphere finally dissipated. Daniel felt a weight lift off his shoulders. He had, in fact, closed a chapter of his life, and there were no regrets. Arlette, who watched everything from afar, knew that that moment was important for Daniel. When he returned to her, there was a lightness in his step, a clarity in his gaze. The past was behind him, and the future, with all its possibilities, was now before him. After the intense conversation with Claire, Daniel returned to Arlette with a feeling of relief. The weight of the past had finally been left behind, and now he was ready to focus on the present. Sitting at a table further away, the two began to talk, and for the first time, Daniel felt that he could be completely open with someone. The conversation flowed naturally, as if they were old friends who finally had the opportunity to get to know each other deeply. There was something special about Arlette, a calm, life-earned wisdom that Daniel had never experienced before. As they talked, Daniel and Arlette began to share their life stories. Daniel talked about his achievements and challenges, about how he had lost himself in his work and neglected the things that really mattered, like his relationships and his own happiness. Arlette, in turn, told about her difficulties, about how life had taken her from a stable situation to the streets. However, what was most surprising was the way she approached these experiences, without bitterness, but with an optimistic view that everything she had been through had served to shape who she was. This prospect left Daniel deeply impressed. What started as a simple exchange of words quickly turned into something much deeper. Daniel realized that despite their differences in class and backgrounds, he and Arlette shared something in common. They were both looking for a genuine connection. In Daniel's case, he had spent years surrounded by people who were with him out of convenience, or because of their social position. Arlette, on the other hand, was looking for someone who saw her beyond her circumstances, someone who saw the value she carried internally. And in that moment, they both found it in each other. During the conversation, they laughed together, shared comfortable silences, and at several points, Daniel found himself admiring the way Arlette expressed her thoughts. She not only listened, but also deeply understood what he said. This ability to understand was something he had rarely encountered in his previous relationships. It was as if, for the first time, he was truly being seen and accepted for who he was, rather than what he represented. Arlette, with her simplicity and authenticity, was exactly what Daniel needed at that moment in his life. As they talked about the future, it was clear that they were both ready to leave the past behind and build something new. Daniel, with all his financial security, found himself inspired by Arlette's dreams, which until then had been buried by life's circumstances. She spoke about her desires to go back to school, to find a decent job, and to rebuild her life. And Daniel, with genuine excitement, offered not only emotional but also practical support. He wanted to help her achieve those dreams, not out of charity, but because he saw the immense potential that Arlette had. This exchange of confidences and promises was not only a sign of a growing friendship, but also of something deeper. There was a silent complicity between them, something that transcended the mere chance that had brought them together. Daniel's meeting with Arlette had undoubtedly been impulsive, but now he realized that there was something much bigger at stake. They were both growing together, learning from each other's experiences, and becoming stronger for whatever lay ahead. The connection between them was not superficial. It was something that was blossoming from the inside out. As the conversation progressed, Daniel began to feel different. He couldn't explain exactly what it was, but he felt a serenity that he hadn't experienced in a long time. Arlette, with her calm presence, had brought out a side of Daniel that he himself didn't know existed. And maybe that was the real secret of a strong bond. When the other person manages to reveal something in you that was hidden, something that you didn't even know you were capable of being. That's what Daniel was starting to feel around Arlette. As time passed and the night progressed, they noticed that the party around them continued, but in a distant way. The wedding, which previously seemed to be the central point of that night, was now just the backdrop for something much more important: the construction of a new relationship. Every word they exchanged, every look they shared, strengthened the bond between them. It wasn't just a friendship, and it wasn't an overwhelming passion either. It was something much more balanced, something that grew over time, and with mutual understanding. At the end of that conversation, both Daniel and Arlette knew that, from now on, their lives would be intertwined. They didn't know exactly what the future held, but they were willing to find out together. And this mutual willingness, this willingness to explore what was to come, was what made that connection so special. Arlette, with her calmness, brought Daniel a peace he hadn't felt in a long time. And Daniel, with his desire to help, offered Arlette the chance to rebuild her life in ways she had never imagined. So, while the wedding lights were still shining in the background, Daniel and Arlette left the party hand in hand, ready to start a new journey. What had started as an impulsive decision turned into something much more significant. They didn't know exactly where they were going, but they knew that together they could face any challenge that came their way. As the night drew to a close, the feeling of relief and anticipation grew for both Daniel and Arlette. They knew that, despite all the curious looks and silent judgments, they had experienced something transformative that night. Hand in hand, as they left their marriage behind, the realization that something new and promising was ahead dawned between them. It wasn't just about physically leaving the event. It was about leaving the past behind, with all its uncertainties, fears, and unmet expectations. Arlette, who had only recently been on the streets, now walked alongside Daniel with the confidence of someone who knows their life is about to change. This change was not just circumstantial, but internal. Both Daniel and Arlette had faced challenges that shaped them in different ways. Daniel, previously a man too focused on work, now saw life from a new perspective, where human connections and emotional support had immeasurable value. Arlette, on the other hand, who had spent so long surviving day to day, was beginning to see the horizon again, seeing possibilities that had previously seemed unattainable. Together, they formed an unlikely duo, but perfectly aligned in their needs and desires for renewal. As they walked away from their marriage, a sense of freedom enveloped them both. There was no longer the weight of Claire's expectations or the guests' judgmental looks. It was as if, finally, they could take a deep breath and focus on what really mattered: the future they were beginning to build together. And that future, as uncertain as it was, seemed far more promising than either of them could have imagined earlier that night. Arlette, with her new confidence, and Daniel, with his desire to care and support, were ready to face whatever came. As they talked, outside the ceremony site, they began to imagine what they could do together. Arlette talked about her dreams of studying, of having a job, and of, one day, being able to help other people who were in situations similar to the one she had faced. Daniel, inspired by her determination, offered to support her in every way possible, without, however, imposing his help. He knew Arlette needed to walk her own path, and he was there to walk alongside her, not dictate the direction. This type of support is what defines a true partnership. For Arlette, this moment of freedom was about more than just leaving her marriage. It was the chance to redefine his life. For so long, she had been seen as worthless, as someone invisible to society. But now, next to Daniel, she began to see herself differently. She knew that the path would not be easy, that there would still be many challenges ahead. But for the first time in a long time, she had the feeling that she wouldn't have to face these challenges alone, and that made all the difference. Daniel, in turn, felt like he was starting a new chapter in his life. The pain of his past with Claire had been left behind, and he was grateful for that. More than getting over his ex-girlfriend, he had gotten over a version of himself that was no longer useful. At Arlette's side, he felt like he was reconnecting with values and feelings he had forgotten. Professional success, which previously seemed to be the only thing that mattered, was now just part of something bigger. What really counted was the emotional and personal journey he was beginning to take. As they walked, the conversation between them flowed lightly and naturally. There was no rush to define what would come next. The most important thing was the feeling that they were on the right path. Arlette talked about small steps she wanted to take, like enrolling in a course or starting to look for work. Daniel listened to her carefully, offering suggestions and ideas, but always making it clear that the choices were hers. This dynamic of respect and mutual support was exactly what they needed to move forward. Life, for Daniel and Arlette, was beginning to unfold in a way that neither of them could have predicted. The wedding invitation, which initially seemed like just an impulsive gesture from Daniel, had become the starting point for something much bigger. They had learned that night that the most meaningful connections often come at the most unlikely times. And as they left their marriage together, they carried with them the certainty that, regardless of what the future brought, they would face everything with courage and determination. The sense of closure wasn't just about Claire's marriage, but about the individual journeys they had both been on thus far. For Arlette, it was the end of a difficult phase, marked by loneliness and helplessness. For Daniel, it was the end of a cycle of doubts and regrets. Now, what was left was an open future, full of possibilities, where both could build something together, based on trust and respect. And as they looked ahead, they knew that this journey would be different from anything they had experienced until then. While the distant sound of the party still echoed, Daniel and Arlette walked away from the crowd, ready to start a new life. They didn't know what the future held for them, but they were ready to find out together. The night, which began full of uncertainty and tension, ended with the promise of something new and meaningful. And so, hand in hand, they walked away, ready to write the next chapter of their stories. Now that you've delved into this story, it's clear that the most profound changes come from unexpected decisions. Arlette and Daniel show us that, no matter how unlikely situations may seem, true transformation comes from within and manifests itself when we least expect it. What this story teaches us is that we all have the ability to rewrite our destiny, to find new possibilities, even when the world tells us otherwise. And you, are you ready to transform your own life? What changes do you need to make to achieve the future you want? Don't wait for the perfect moment or ideal circumstances. Life happens when you make bold decisions, just like Daniel did. Maybe it's time for you to take that step too. If you like this story and want to continue learning about how small gestures can generate big changes, don't forget to subscribe to our channel and turn on notifications. There's so much more to come, and you won't want to miss any updates. After all, we all have a story to tell, and yours can start now.